So I shall welcome everyone for our last session of today. So late afternoon sessions are always challenging for all of us, for the audience as well as for the panelists. Of course, since we also have heard many things today already, so maybe we have to constrain ourselves as well. I have to constrain myself in particular, because there would be so many things one could add or could comment on what have been said today. However, we have our own topic for this panel. And actually, it's not so easy to make the bridge from the last panel to our panel. Maybe if it would have been a bit easier from the second panel in the morning to our panel, where we already had the kind of European perspectives on the table. However, we could probably make a bridge, and I'm glad that you alerted me to this point, that in a way, what we are going to talk about is now about, in a way, visions, to say more general visions for Ukraine's future. And of course, in this context, Germany will also play a great role. And in particular, when it comes to the question which is more narrow here, about rebuilding, reconstruction, and that this will certainly be a major task, not only for the European Union, but also for Germany in particular. So I think it could be interesting, the panel we had before, where we were talking about German discourses, about the German narratives, the quality, or, well, maybe the word quality is not so good, but the quality of the German public debate. And now we confront this debate with the reality, with the practice, with things which are happening in Ukraine and which need to happen maybe in future. And we put it under the title of Rebuilding Ukraine, and thereby using this concept of rebuilding, peace building, and then of course this is a contested notion in itself. And also we have to tackle the challenge that, and I wonder how you see this. It would be very interesting to hear. We have the situation that this rebuilding is already starting now. In terms of planning, in terms of policy making, in terms of very concrete things which are starting or have been done already. So it starts now already during the war, while the war still takes place, while the country has still to defend itself. This kind of rebuilding has already started in parallel to some extent. I think this is also a very unique situation in a way, because normally in the literature we talk about post-conflict peace building, and here we have this underway while the war takes place. So we want to discuss the concept, the policy, maybe also the practices, maybe needs also, and questions of needs and supply, and so on. Of course, we should also keep in mind that rebuilding should be understood in a wider sense. I mean, yeah, and it has different dimensions, material dimensions as well as immaterial dimensions. So we can talk about political institutional rebuilding, which would be more like on domestic politics, I think, on Ukrainian domestic politics. It would also be interesting to hear from you how you see this, the further way into democracy, the electoral politics linked to this. We have the dimension of economic and social rebuilding, so where we have the more reconstruction part in this. We have the cultural and educational rebuilding, I think, which is very important, which have much more long-term implications. And we have something which you may call the mental or sociological rebuilding, which is probably the most difficult part, because it's really about long-term intergenerational aspects of coping with trauma, with the situation of violence, and how to deal with that in long-term in a society, in a Ukrainian in future. However, and this is my last point here, is for opening up our panel, is we all know from the research, from the peace-building research in particular, and I don't know, I hesitate to use the term peace-building here, so because it has some undertone. However, I would like to refer to that because we have a long, research in tradition in peace and conflict research on peace-building, and it is seen very critical as well. There has been some turns in this whole peace-building debate, the local turn and whatever turn. The question is how to avoid a situation where Ukraine becomes a kind of a peace-building pet project of the international donor community. And thereby we end up with a situation which we discussed this morning, where probably there might be the danger of denying Ukrainian agency again, but in another different process, of course. What we have seen in other places in the world very often. So that peace building carries a certain paternalistic, some may even say neo-colonial undertone language practice with it, and how to avoid this now in a situation we face with regard to Ukraine. So now I've maybe spoken for too long already. I should present my panelists. I'm Ulrich Schneckener. I'm the professor of international relations and peace and conflict studies at Osnabrück University. And I'm very happy to introduce our four panelists. And we will start with Tetiana Vodotyka. No, I said Tyka? Yeah. Okay. Hopefully I made it half correctly. She's a historian. She's the academic director of an MA program in urban development and post-war reconstruction at the Kyiv School of Economics. And she has widely published also on this subject. And I would simply refer to her short bio in the material in order. And you could also add everything you want, all of you, because I will only introduce you briefly. She's also an author of non-fiction. This is something I wanted to point out. And maybe there's something, we need some imaginarity about this future as well. So maybe this quality of that you work in non-fiction could help us as well. So this is something I wanted to point out. Then we have Viktoriya Sereda. Okay, there's nothing special about it. She's a sociologist and senior fellow at the Forum Transregionale Studien, which is in Berlin, I assume. Yeah, exactly, at Berlin. She's the director of the project Prisma Ukraina, War, Migration and Memory. And she's also a senior research fellow at the Institute of Ethnology of the National Academy of Science of Ukraine and a professor of the sociology at the Ukrainian Catholic University, I think in Lviv. Is this in Lviv? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, okay, good. I'm correct. And thirdly, I like to welcome Olena Kovalenko. She serves as academic program manager at the Ukrainian Institute in Kiev, and I think we will learn more about the work you do there at the institute. She got her PhD in history at the interesting university, Pontifical University of Johann Paul II in Krakow. Yes. Wow. She wrote her PhD on historic narrative in Soviet Kiev and Moscow guidebooks. And she's very much interested in the cultural history and the urban history and memory studies. And I think your comment will very much relate it to this expertise as well. And finally, we have our German colleague, Julian Bergmann. He is a senior researcher at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, IDOS. I always was wondering where the O comes from, but okay, maybe that's a secret. Working on European Union's global role, in particular in terms of Europe's development policy. And he has also worked a lot on the role of the EU in terms of conflict manager, or involvement in international conflict management. He had done his PhD in political science on the role of the EU, in particular with regard to the Western Balkans and South Caucasus. So there is some relation also to the region here. And more recently, he has published policy papers, articles on the role of the EU and other international donors in the context of preparing or already engaging in rebuilding Ukraine. So I think with this, I hope we have a very interesting panel, and we start with Tetiana.
Thank you, Ulrich, for your introduction and for bridging the previous panel and this one. We were also talking about remembering our roles, and now, as you mentioned, I'm in a role of academic director of very fresh master program in urban development and post-war reconstruction in Kyiv School of Economics, and also as a journal editor and founder of the journal of urban studies, City Historical Culture Society, and it remains the only journal in urban studies in Ukraine, peer-reviewed one. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I will be talking about urban studies and the role of academia and what the changes are happening right now in the field and how this may affect the forthcoming rebuilding and reconstruction. Well, that's no big secret that rebuilding and reconstruction will be focused also on the cities, maybe mainly on the cities, on urban settlements, and the field that could have provided experts for this aim is actually I would say it's in the process of changing, if not crisis. And also, you Ulrich mentioned that reconstruction is something that happening maybe literally as I'm speaking now, somewhere, I don't know, someone rebuilt its own house or whatever. And we meaning academia, we understand that building back better is not something that will work, or at least not something that we're gonna work like for a long time, but that's what's happening. I mean, we simply, in most of cases, we simply reconstruct what was ruined, because, well, we need roof, we need windows, we need whatever, we need to go through the winter somehow. And it's already visible that why it's happening like that, and especially with the cities, because there's a huge demand for people. And it's already obvious, and maybe Viktoriya will be talking about that more, that human resources, people, that's the bottleneck of their construction. Maybe not even the money, not even the technologies, not even the projects or the vision, but people who will do the job. And that's why this new master program was actually started, and from all over the Ukraine we were hearing like finally someone will prepare people for this aim. And but why I don't know, we're 2023 and there's still huge demand. That's because 30 years of developing of the field, urban studies, urban history, well, that will be very self-critical, but did not manage to provide enough experts for that. Society, academia itself didn't felt that huge, that the demand didn't understood that need for this level of expertise, and that's one option. And second thing is that since 2013 and even since 2022, many institutions in the field, they were threatened, like physically. And here I have to recall a story that will not end it, but this institution is very in danger. In Berdyansk, which is now occupied, there was an institute for urban history urban history in Berdyansk National University. The city is occupied, the university moved, the center, this institution moved, and two scholars, my colleagues Viktoriya Konstantinova and Igor Liman, they are displaced scholars, but within Ukraine. So do they have any capacity in terms of emotions, in terms of time, in terms of everything, working on expertise or working on developing anything? Well, they do, of course, they do the job, but that's simply not enough. I could also mention, for example, many of you could have heard Center for Urban History in Lviv. But very well-funded, very well-known, very vocal institution, but obviously not focused on teaching. And maybe on informal forms of teaching, but not in terms of academia, of preparing people, as I already mentioned, to do the job. And I can go on and continue with all that. So, and obviously in March 2022, when an invasion happened, and again in 2014, for example, I just defended my PhD thesis and got my diploma and thought, okay, I've got the diploma, but does Ukraine need me? My job? In March 2022, I bet lots of people were thinking the same, and me, including myself. Does Ukraine need me? I should have learned something more practical, maybe shooting, maybe running. It took quite some time to rebuild my and academical person identity and come into terms with myself. Well, education, that's always an option. Education is always an option to feel needed, and is always an option to contribute to the future of your own state. Very simple, very obvious maybe decision, and here I have to point that it might be not well known here that in Ukraine for a long time and still nowadays education could be a bit separated from pure science, pure research. We have such institution as National Academy of Science of Ukraine, which is like ivory tower for many of us, safe space. So it could be kind of separating. And also to find, those new lenses, and you were mentioning a pet project, this is also about decolonization and subjectivity and being vocal and building not only capacity in terms of experts who would do the job, but in terms of vision. That we could learn, we could learn from best cases all over the world, but not any case could be copy-pasted. It would be simply not rooted. Whatever it means, money, it will simply not work on Ukrainian soil. That's obvious. And that is why, again, about reconstruction and these urban communities and everything, we have to bring very different expertise to develop our own recipe. And who can do that? Obviously, academia. Maybe that's my final point. I can't remember exact panel where was it said that we do not have to reinvent the wheels, and someone opposed that. Well, that's the whole democracy is about discussing and talking again. I would say that building tomorrow is discussing today. Well, maybe might sound more pathetic, but I like citing Jose Ortega Gasset, and he was writing, that living is a constant process of deciding what we're going to do. Constant process of deciding. That's what academia used to do.
I can agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Viktoriya, you can follow up from this.
So I will be talking more from a sociological point of view, and probably try to look a little bit more on the society and how society response to those questions. And for me, of course, we cannot, within the 10 minutes, you cannot go in depth or dive. So I will roadmap certain issues and then we can discuss or just point to ourselves what issues are important to keep in mind. So for me, first of all, the first question is rebuild for whom? And as a sociologist, I see that there is one very, very big black box. And this black box is a huge displacement. When we have at least 1/3 of population on move, displaced within the country with triple, double experiences of resettling, moving back and forth. We also have, depending on UN or EU data quoted, we have around 4 million people outside of Ukraine already, and these are only those who are registered. And the question is, if we are rebuilding, for whom we are rebuilding, and we don't know and we won't know who'll be living where and in which cities, in which parts of the country, what would be the composition of the population. Mm-hmm. What we are facing right now is a massive depopulation of biggest cities of Ukraine in south and east. And we also facing the issues and questions of integration of IDPs in the west and center. And for many of those who are displaced within the country, one important issue is that for the first time, they also have to go not to a big cities because there are not so many in west and the center, but also to go to the countryside. And this is also divide countryside versus city, not only cultural or whatever linguistic someone would imagine, yes, but mostly this. And the one of the key issues, as for the sociologist and a scholar of Ukraine right now, for me, is the phenomena which we observed, or those who study Second World War in Ukraine observed that Ukrainian cities lost their cultural diversity after the Second World War. And this was extremely tragic for the local communities and for the cities and for the population. And nobody is speaking about this, but actually we are witnessing this for the second time, especially in east and south of the country, in the countryside, because in this countryside was extremely diverse ethnically and religiously. Just to mention several groups, refugees which settled in these parts of the country: Crimean Tatars, Turkmeshketins, Assyrians, Greeks. One can continue, different Roma communities, Krims, and so on. Roma. So all these groups already left or had witnessed atrocities under occupation, and there is a very big question whether they will be back, and I'm afraid to say that in many cases they won't be, because of not only of their experiences, but also because of the agricultural and ecological situation which is radically shifting there. So, for example, many of those groups were living from agriculture, which would not be possible at the same level as it was previously. So this is the question: who will be living and what will be happening to the diversity of our country? The second question is when to rebuild. We right now, if you read the latest news or comments, more and more voices saying that this will be a protracted war which will continue for more than a year or several years. These are the expectations. And if this protracted war, then again there will be a lot of challenges. And if we look at the surveys, we see that regions are divided. Those which are mostly affected they want rebuilding to begin right now, and this is obvious. If you don't have windows on or roof, you need it for the next winter to survive. And those which are less affected, they prefer that we wait, accumulate resources, and then we do something big with the country. And here, of course, the question of academia comes, because this is the sphere where I'm myself located. So what I'm witnessing right now, of course, loss of infrastructure, because so many laboratories, institutions, universities, schools, hundreds of schools and universities or colleges were shelled and ceased to exist, or they are under occupation. But what we're also witnessing right now, that due to the policy of Ministry of Education, more and more people are losing their positions, because there is a growing divide between those who are in the country and outside of the country. And actually, if we are talking about new division lines, they are not so much going along any language, culture, or ethnic identity, but now a new division is building up along these lines.
Being inside or outside?
Inside of outside. For example, beginning from the 1st September, I look at my Facebook feed, and almost daily I see my colleagues with whom I used to cooperate and do a lot of projects in all parts of the country, posting that they lost their position in Ukraine. Of course, they can find temporary or longer shelter outside of the Ukraine, but then the question would be, would it be possible for them in the future to return back to Ukraine? And I think this is the issue which we all should try to target. And it's also about connectivity and connections, because we have a lot of, most of all, male scholars, but also many female with kids or elderly who cannot travel outside of the country. And it's easier maybe for social sciences and humanities. Also, still archives and resources and materials are an important issue, but even more so for people in natural sciences. Because if you do not have access to laboratory, if you cannot do experiments, then in 1 year is okay, you survive. But if this is 3, 4, 5 years, then you are out of the market. You are not able to compete on the same level with your colleagues. The question how to rebuild is also another question. So what are the priorities? And again, if we look at the surveys, we see very interesting phenomena, which I saw previously for many years, that the most trusted are international and local funds or institutions. So state institutions fallen in between. So this is the question. And very positive trend for me was when people were asked about what should be the focus and target. They preferred really business or opening jobs, these issues, to paternalistic social security measures. So this shows that actually Ukrainian society is ready to suffer for some time without social security build up or like payments to people, but with more focus on really building up infrastructure which will allow them to go on their own. But another issue which I do not see in the discourses of our officials, which is extremely important for me as a sociologist, is actually readiness to accept the labor, additional labor coming from outside of the country, openness to migration. Why? Because if we see, again, in those sociological polls, Ukrainians say that it's good if our partners will give us money, but labor force should be Ukrainian. And nobody is talking exactly that we do face depopulation and we don't know how many of those will return. So there will be issue of labor and need in labor, and then Ukraine will have to open to outside migration and then there might be a spin of populism like one we observe in neighboring countries, which is anti-migrant. We never ever had it really intensively present in Ukrainian official political discourses before, but this is thing which we have to think about if we are thinking about rebuilding the country. And if we are talking about academia, and this would be my final point, that again in those surveys we observed that there is a big dissatisfaction with the higher education services in such cities, big cities, and Kharkiv, Dnipro, Odessa. Of course, this partially because infrastructure was targeted, but we also can ask the question, what can we do? How can we help? Or what's needed? And here I would say that for me it's very important to establish on-site and online, or possibly as much as possible hybrid types of programs supporting Ukrainian students and Ukrainian fellows to combat brain drain, but to emphasize brain exchange, and also to avoid West-planning, because it's very important not to have something when someone comes, gives money and tells you what to do. And also, but focusing on in the future, first of all, on multiple directions. So it's very important that in the future we build such structures which will allow international scholars to come to Ukraine at the same level as Ukrainian scholars to go outside. Maybe to think about the pendulum exchanges, especially for science from natural science communities. Why? Because to build up a new good laboratories will take a lot of time and money, and they will need this to have a possibility to spend at least few months outside of the country in a good laboratories, and then be able to come back and proceed. And I will bring just two examples in which I'm personally involved, and I can tell about them more during the coffee break. So one of those initiatives is Invisible University for Ukraine, which is co-organized by DAT and Central European University. And during this semester, we had over 350 applications from students, Ukrainian students from beginning who are scattered all around from Saudi Arabia, US, Kazakhstan, Georgia, European Union, and Ukraine, and even some who escaped occupation in Ukraine. And another project just unfolding, which is Virtual Advanced Studies Institute in Ukraine, in which I'll be a coordinator. And exactly this is an initiative which combines Ukrainian fellows in Ukraine and Ukrainian fellows in 12 partner institutions so far, in US and in Europe, and possibility to network together. For me, big issues for those who stay outside is the isolation of Ukrainian scholars. Sometimes you are alone with your topic at certain department. For me, another important question right now, what I see in Germany, is the positioning of Ukrainian scholars. Just to give you example, quite often seminars or meetings or events or grants are immediately labeled for scholars in risk, and then we are immediately put in a special category. And I remember my colleague who were displaced in Ukraine, and every time she was introduced in audience, nothing was mentioned that she is a professor, that she has a lot of qualifications. And here is our displaced colleague.
Yeah.
If you want to ask personal questions, what are her experiences from displacement, and it goes on. And I think this is happening to us right now quite often in those places where we are. Just last example, the Humboldt University right now organizes a series of Ukrainian studies seminars in a focus, in the name is for threatened scholars. So these are Ukrainian threatened scholars, and let them talk about their issues. So it's not admitting that we do not have expertise in Ukrainian studies, and we have a good experts here. So let's have a talk and let's try to rethink together what is happening and what we are missing. But and this will be happening to people from other countries as well, Syria, Afghanistan. So these are our specific category people. So let's try to avoid categorization in these terms and power relations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Olena, please.
Thank you. Despite my academic background, today I'm presenting the institution for which is dealing with cultural diplomacy. Therefore, I will be talking mainly from the perspective of a manager who is dealing with cultural and academical projects. So I represent the Ukrainian Institute, and this is the institution affiliated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, whose mission and goal is to strengthen Ukraine internationally and domestically by means of cultural diplomacy. We are programming projects in different arts like theater, literature, performing arts, visual arts, but also have a small department for academia and research. And the main audience of our projects are wide audience outside of Ukraine. So we want to speak about Ukraine for foreign audiences. And therefore, the perspective that I will be giving for rebuilding and reconstructing Ukraine will be somehow connected with social, cultural rebuilding and what I see in the field as a person who is practicing culture right now. So I will start with a few banal things by saying that since February 2022, Ukrainian culture has suffered significant losses, and it's very hard to estimate right now how many physical places of heritage were destroyed. We can start the number from 300 and go up, but again, this is impossible to tell what we've lost. But not only buildings, but also creative and cultural industries suffer significant losses. The funding for key institutions in Ukraine are cut. There is an exodus of enormous number of specialists from the field. The war resulted in sharp decline in the availability of cultural services, Ukraine-wide, and also in local communities. And if we can take some numbers, the publishing industry has faced 60% reduction, 40% of specialists employed in creative industries lost their jobs, 50% of creative businesses have seen a decline in profits, and the cultural market, the market for cultural events, shrink by 90% now in comparison to 2021. If it comes to how to rebuild, and if it comes to physical heritage sites, estimations from April this year made by UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay were telling that we need around $7 billion to rebuild what has been destroyed. But again, this number is growing constantly because the war is continuing and the destruction is continuing. And it's completely impossible to estimate the resources that we need to resuscitate Ukraine cultural sector if it comes to people who are working in this cultural sector, in creative industries. And what is obvious now that the restoration process will need a lot of donor support, and the recovery will need strict guidelines for donors who will step into this process if we all together want to restore Ukrainian heritage and cultural sector understood as people who are working in this sector. And I have a few guidelines to propose you to discuss, something that I see working in this sector, and something that could be a guideline for donors. And the first important thing, my ask for donors is to plan strategically, which means invest not in a separate projects, but in a long-term programs of support in Ukraine. It's super easy to invest smaller money in a short project because you will finish it in a year. It's easy to make reporting, to show nice numbers, to show results, but then it doesn't give an opportunity for Ukrainian cultural sector to plan, to extend these horizons of planning and to understand what we will be doing in a year or two, and also to follow up on the results of these small projects because they're finishing and everyone forgets. So if it's possible, it's super important to invest in long-time activities, something that allows us to plan at least for 2 years ahead and to involve people at least in 2 years ahead in some activities. Second thing is empowering Ukrainian institutions and actors. Despite the common illusion that Ukraine is on the top of the news and everyone is interested in Ukrainian studies, all the numbers and all the reports show that it's not like this, and Ukraine is still underrepresented if it comes to academia, if it comes to the number of courses about Ukraine that we have in universities, and if it comes to different cultural events and projects. And the recipe here, I don't know if it will work, but this is something that we can try, is to involve Ukrainian specialists on the level of programming activity, not as a participant, not as a speaker, but the person who can influence the agenda and the way how this event, how this something will be happening. So from the very beginning, involve Ukrainians in programming activities. The third thing is facilitating the return of Ukrainians, and this is something that Viktoriya started to discuss in general for Ukraine and for Ukraine's population. In cultural industry, it's enormously big problem because the war resulted that 20 women who constitute the main active part of cultural workers left Ukraine, and we don't know if they will come back. And the mean how to make people return to Ukraine is to give them at least some guarantees. We cannot guarantee that they will be safe in their homes in Kyiv or in Lviv, that the missile will not hit them, but what we can guarantee that they will have job, that they will have work, they will have salary, and this is why it's important to come back to the first point, establishing long-term programs and projects is important to give this feeling of stability at least for short periods of few years, so people can come back to Ukraine and work in Ukraine, having this safe material environment at home. And here I would like to make a shift to academia, because all of these rebuilding activities and all of the things that we can try to do in the cultural sector, they will make sense only in the situation when Europe and European academia will rethink Ukraine as a part of European world. And we were talking a lot about it today. What does it mean to rethink Ukraine as a part of European world? And I will make only a few additional statements here. I think that values-wise, Ukrainian society has proven that we're part of Europe, that we're defending European values of dignity, of solidarity, of freedom. We started to defend them on the Euromaidan during the Revolution of Dignity, whose 10 years anniversary we're going to have in a month, and we're continuing to defend these values with weapons on the front lines. If it comes to rebuilding Ukraine, it most likely will be happening along with Euro integration process, and I want to be an optimist here that still, at least Ukraine will start an assessment negotiations with Europe, and we will try to adjust our legislation system, our economy to European standards. So this sphere will be somehow worked on. But what we as academia have to work on is the common understanding and making sure that everyone in Europe understands that Ukraine is a part of Europe. And here the education, of course, plays the vital role. and not the academic level of education, but I will argue that school education is extremely important. And I will refer to one of the researchers that we in Ukrainian Institute had, because a part of different art programs, we also have analytical and research departments. And in 2021-2022, we've analyzed school textbooks from Great Britain, Germany, Poland, and France regarding what is the image of Ukraine in these school textbooks. And as you may guess, the results are not very promising and positive for Ukraine, because despite different approaches to shaping historical knowledge in different countries and different guidebooks, in the most of episodes, Ukraine is mentioned as geographical rather than historical object. So this is just a territory, a part of Soviet Union or Russian Empire, or depending on the time we're talking about. And the topic of Ukraine in all the textbooks in all the countries is blurred and fragmented, and very often associated solely with global catastrophes, such as wars. We have World War II and the First Revolution, humanitarian disasters, and so on. So this constitutes the image for Ukraine for the majority of Europeans who do not continue their education in humanitarian area, right? And this becomes extremely important because this way of seeing Ukraine creates a fertile ground for the absorption of Russian propaganda with this idea of Ukraine as a failed state, and so on. So changing narratives is absolutely important basis if we're talking about any kind of rebuilding process in culture and in general. And here I think that the good example of how the work can be done is the work of German European Commission of Historians. I know that the Commission is mainly focused on academic knowledge, but maybe something that is debated for a long time, the creation of German Historical Institute in Kyiv could be a good move to start these conversations. And I understand the change in school guidebooks is a huge task. It's not that easy. It will require years of work, of preparations, but if we don't establish institutions who can do this job, we will never start. So it is important to advocate as much as we can for creating these institutions, for starting first steps into this direction. And last, I think this is obvious and Ulrich started from this statement, that we are in a specific situation when we have to talk about rebuilding and reconstruction being at war. We don't know how long the war will last, for another 6 months or another 6 years. So it's important to start both conversations about reconstruction, but also first steps and actions to take this risk, starting from today, because this will strengthen Ukraine in the fight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, Julian, you can follow up from this, because I guess now the link has been made also when you were referring to that this all has to be thought of in the context of the European integration process. I think this is a very important point when we think about rebuilding, whatever that means. It needs to be linked to this perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Uwe Schneckener, for the kind introduction. Also, thanks to the organizers for the invitation. And my input will be from a perspective of also a political scientist and also someone who's working in the area of research on development policy and international cooperation. So I'm not a Ukraine expert, just to flag this right from the start, but my input draws on the perspectives I mentioned, focusing on the international governance aspects, also a little bit the policy debates that we are currently seeing about reconstruction and rebuilding, not only in Ukraine, but also at the international level. I would start with what is actually the state of play of international efforts to support Ukraine's reconstruction and recovery. And I think here it's very important also to recognize that reconstruction is no abstract concept, it's no distant prospect, but it's already happening and also needs to happen now. Why does it need to happen now? Because of the immense destruction and damage that has been inflicted by Russia's full-scale invasion. Maybe just to give one number, the World Bank estimated in February this year that around 1.4 million residential buildings in Ukraine have been damaged or destroyed. 2,700 schools have been damaged, 400 even destroyed. Yeah? So just one figure, and I think we could mention several of them, just to show how big the damage and losses are. And it's already happening. And there, maybe just one example here. There's an online platform, a digital platform. It's called Dream, the Dream platform, the digital restoration ecosystem for administrative management.
Oh, God. Dream is much better.
Dream is better. It's a platform that was set up by Ukrainian civil society. So the RISE coalition, a coalition of Ukrainian civil society organizations together with the Ukrainian government, that actually lists all reconstruction projects in Ukraine. And I just checked the website yesterday. There are already 2,200 projects on that list and 700 projects already active. So reconstruction is happening. And you can go to the website and look what is it actually about, just to make this point. Reconstruction and rebuilding, and my colleagues all mentioned that already, it will be a massive challenge in very many different dimensions. It will also be a challenge in terms of financial support to Ukraine. I mean, estimates range from 411 billion, that's an estimation by the World Bank, to 750 billion US dollars, estimation by the Ukrainian government in June 22, right? So then the figures will be even higher, say that the full-scale invasion continues. So international support will be needed. I think this is clear. There's another discussion of how to make Russia actually also pay for reconstruction. This is a different discussion that I won't touch upon here because we would need much more time, but I think it's also important just to say that there's a discussion on this and also part of the international debates on reconstruction. But I will focus here on what have been major steps so far. I mean, you may know that the Ukrainian government in June 22 presented a national reconstruction plan in Lugano at the Ukraine Recovery Conference. And this is we can discuss about like the contents of the plan, but it's a comprehensive plan that foresees like a full modernization of the country beyond only the repairing of damaged infrastructure. And I stress this, and I think it's very important also that this is a Ukrainian initiative to deal with this reconstruction so early on. It's not a donor-driven project. Why do I mention this? I think it's obvious or evident for my Ukrainian colleagues, but in German discussion, I often see that there's, just to give an anecdote, when I was giving a radio interview on this topic and the journalist asked, is it really the right time now to discuss about energy efficient refurbishment of buildings in Ukraine? And isn't this again a donor-driven, a Western agenda that is not relevant to the country in question? That was the provocative, but also I think in a very justified question. I mean, asking this question, so what is this all about? And of course, again, it also reinforces this objectification of Ukraine, denial of Ukrainian agency. It's a Ukrainian initiative to discuss this from early on. And it's, of course, not only about the energy efficient refurbishing of buildings, it's about so much more. And I think these are points that need to be stressed in the debate, also in the German debate. Now, another important step at the international level that has been taken is the establishment of a multi-agency donor coordination platform, a long name for saying that the G7 states, the Ukrainian government and the European Union, they meet regularly to discuss on coordination of reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine. First meetings have taken place in January this year. The Ukrainian government just calls this platform, it's the financial Rammstein, right? As an extension of the talks in Rammstein, it's about financial issues. So you also see that the framing of what this is about from an international perspective, it's about donor coordination, a development policy issue. From the Ukrainian government perspective, it's an extension of the talks in Rammstein to support Ukraine through different means. There have been Ukraine recovery conferences organized in Lugano and London this year. Next one will be actually in Germany. So the German government, together with the Ukrainian government, will host this one. It's also an explicit wish and also an explicit aim of the German government to include civil society, even more than which was the case in London. Final point on on the international steps, and this was already mentioned. Ukraine got the candidate status. Also, it's at least likely that the Commission in November will recommend to open accession negotiations, and then we will see whether the European Council in December will agree. What might be less known is that at the London Ukraine Recovery Conference, Ursula von der Leyen proposed the so-called Ukraine Facility, which is a proposal that the EU supports Ukraine with 50 billion for the next 4 years. It's important to say that she proposed, not pledged, this 50 billion. So it's not sure that the EU will actually pay those 50 billions because the Parliament and the Council first need to agree on this. And in that context, what is currently negotiated or developed is the so-called Ukraine plan. So a plan how to link reconstruction with the European integration process of Ukraine. And this is done in negotiations between the Ukrainian government and also the European Commission. So there is a joint ambition of donors that reconstruction really leads to a sustainable transformation of the country, leading Ukraine into the EU. Of course, there are different perspectives on will this be the end point of reconstruction, or will it be rather one of the first steps in 2 years or 3 years that Ukraine will join? There are different perceptions. I think also they will come up again in this process of reconstruction. The second point I wanted to make on what are like the lessons learned from previous international reconstruction efforts that might be relevant. And I also need to say here, of course, Ukraine is a very specific case, so we always have to be a little bit cautious about applying lessons from other contexts to Ukraine. But at least one lesson I think that has been learned from previous cases and already been implemented in the case of Ukraine, that you really have to start early with planning, with preparing for reconstruction, before you have the international community and donors coming in with their financial flows, pouring into the country, and then it gets messy, right? So you need a governance structure, and this structure has already, to a certain extent, started to be set up in Ukraine. For example, the Ukrainian government created this state agency for restoration and infrastructure development. So it's a state agency that will coordinate reconstruction. And we also have international efforts, like I mentioned, a coordination platform. So coordination will be important, and also coordination between different donors or supporters of Ukraine, such as Germany and the US. So we actually, what I would say is we need to avoid a situation where we have different reconstruction plans, we have different funding instruments for different donor constellations with the Ukrainian government. We partly already see this playing out. Like I said, we have the Ukrainian National Recovery Plan, then the European Commission said we need a Ukraine plan, and there might be other donors saying we also need our own plan with the Ukrainian government for reconstruction. So we have to see how this plays out. The third point I want to make, and the final one, if I still have time, I'm not sure, maybe for
Final point, yeah.
2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, and this is on this, how does like the EU accession and the reconstruction effort relate to each other? And of course, I mean, strongly aligning Ukraine's EU accession and the reconstruction process makes sense, and I think it's really clear, it's really important to do that. At the same time, I think we should not forget that this will be no automatism, right? So there are different processes that follow different logics, and they will also lead to tensions. So I'm saying this not to pour water into the wine, so to say, but to make aware that those processes actually come with very different logics. For example, enlargement really comes with top-down conditionalities. Yeah. The European Commission tells governments what criteria they have to fulfill, sometimes on a very technical level. On the other hand, for Ukrainian reconstruction, what is envisioned and still needs to be implemented is, of course, a strong focus on local ownership, also including not only like the central government, but also the local level civil society. So that's one tension, right? Then there's also, for the enlargement process, the demand for long-term institutional reforms. But for reconstruction, it will be essential that you can very quickly show and effectively that there are impacts, right? So that Ukrainian citizens can see, yeah, reconstruction is really improving our situation. This is another tension. And maybe a third one I mentioned is that enlargement, of course, is an EU-centered process. But reconstruction is much broader. Yeah? It involves the US, and the US needs to be part of that. Other non-EU donors, Japan, for example, is also playing an important role in others. And then maybe finally on enlargement, of course, compared to previous enlargement rounds, I think the political conditions for enlargement do not seem to have become more favorable compared to previous enlargement rounds. And I think we have to be aware of that. There are risks of blockages and delays. So what does the EU need to do there? I would just say two things. I mean, first of all, the EU needs to prepare for providing like a substantial amount of financial support for reconstruction. And those 50 billions proposed, it's a lot of money, but they will definitely not be enough. Just to say one figure, the Ukrainian state budget deficit for 2023 is about 35 to 38 billion, and just for this year. And the EU already provided for this year 18 billion to support the Ukrainian government. So you see that this 50 billion for 4 years might be sufficient to stabilize the state budget, but they won't be sufficient to really start on reconstruction on a large scale. Right? The second thing, and that's the final point, the EU needs to prepare for making the enlargement process more flexible and also to allow for as many integrative steps before formal membership, just for the case that individual member states, and I think this risk is real, will delay or block the process there. And just to conclude, I would say, I think there's a lot of talk when you talk about the EU, there's a lot of talk about the EU as a geopolitical power these days. And I think if we take this serious, then we should not, and I think this is also mentioned in some of the panels today, we should not sell support to Ukraine's reconstruction, for example, Germany's support to reconstruction, as a moral responsibility. Right? We should rather say also to public, to domestic audiences, it's clearly now a strategic interest. It's a strategic investment in a stable European security order. And then if we buy into this narrative, if we say, yeah, we agree with this, then also we need to step up our support there. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much. So I think we got 4 different contributions, different aspects of the topic. I think we still have about 25 minutes to discuss these.
Yes, my question concerns more the internal challenges for such, large-scale European recovery and reconstruction programs. Even if I see this point that it is good to declare it not a moral thing, but a strategic security issue, and that it's good to invest into the strategic security. The internal challenge now being not only that we have loads of populist movements inside the EU, which in one word says, why Ukraine? We have so much tasks to do in our own places. But we have also tremendous challenges, for example, to address climate crisis. And I would like to listen a little more about perhaps some smart ideas how to integrate the two of such kind of tremendous challenges, which seem to be over our power. If there's any idea how to intelligently integrate such initiatives in order to do not double work or something.
Okay, thank you. I make a quick round of answers and then we start with you, the second round.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I think this was a topic which has been raised, I think, in a number of the comments here. This whole demographic issue, returning, emigration, re-emigration, and so on. But maybe we start with Viktoriya, and because there were a number of questions which were specifically addressed to you and your work.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not a demographer, and my focus is more like war, migration, and sense of belonging. So, and not long-term predictions, but of course we can think, and this is exactly when I said that we are dealing with a black box, because nobody knows who will go which direction. We can try, and it's very difficult to do any predictions. Why? Because whenever you do a survey, you ask people, and of course they behave emotionally. And as you said, everybody of us is really wanting to return, and everybody is stating this, or at least many. But we never know what is the real conditions and what will be steps taken by every single person when the peace is and when people will have a possibility to travel back and forth and so on. So one thing is the survey, and the other thing is the prediction. Of course, we can do some in-depth interviews and look for the certain factors which influence the decisions of the people who either decide to stay or decide to go. And among those is, for example, job market. As soon as you are cut off your connections, you start considering survival strategies in another country in a much more active way than you are still linked to that. And similarly, we don't know what will be happening. Because first of all, the time span, the situation, the peace conditions, because in some cases marriages might be no longer mattering. If it's very long time perspective, there might be a lot of divorces or going different directions. So in reality, we don't know. We can estimate. Rough estimate is that 1/3 will stay, but you never know. And about rural areas, for me, it's also extremely big issue and question. On the top of you said, we also have to consider ecological situation there. So is there a possibility actually to return, and would it be possible to do agricultural way of life or living there if we know that now we have a highest number of mines ever planted in the country, and on the top of that explosives and all the chemicals and all other ecological influences on the soil. So the question is really very big. Will Ukrainian countryside in those parts which are very actively involved in the combat activities, actually how much of it will survive in the future? Yes, and what will be the situation? This should be also part of us thinking about the situation in the country. And about interpersonal trust, we know it from even previous studies, and if you're interested in that topic, I would advise you to go to the webpage of Zahori Foundation. They did a lot of studies really under very different angles about the charity support, internal support, interpersonal trust relations, and what we see for quite a long time, that actually interpersonal trust relations are quite strong in Ukraine in terms of self-support. And we also observe it with this active civil society activism, which goes through invisible networks, through self-aid communities popping up everywhere where we have displaced or where the need is. But this trust is, but we have a very strong distrust to anything which starts in institutionalizing. So people prefer to give money hand to hand, impersonally, to those who we know, than to certain funds or to certain institutions, because they immediately start distrusting them. And even if you look at the surveys, you immediately see that there is a big difference between volunteer organizations and NGOs. And you have, if you do a survey, you should be very cautious which term you are using, because you might be getting very different results just because of the different terms.
And volunteer organizations are preferred.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And more trusted.
Yeah, I see. Julian, you may tackle some of the questions which were, in particular the support question.
Yeah.
I guess how to sustain support in EU member states.
I mean, Yeah, I would say I fully agree with to have really good arguments also and to communicate this to the public to justify our support and also our financial support to Ukraine. And the geopolitical argument I mentioned, I think it's just one part of this, explaining also like providing good arguments for this. Not only because there are several other challenges that we need to deal with, for example, climate change that you also mentioned, but also we already live in times of financial austerity, and these austerity already constrains donor support to Ukraine, right? For example, if you look at the support that the European Union provided, the 18 billion this year, or the 50 billion for the next 4 years, out of the 18 billion for this year, this is completely money provided as loans. So money that Ukraine has to pay back.
Yeah.
Right? It will be, I mean, they are very concessional loans. Where we have to starting paying them back in 2032, and the interest rates are relatively low, but it's loans, right? And the same for the 50 billion, 40 billion were proposed as loans again. So if you follow, I mean, if I argue, okay, this won't be sustainable to only provide loans, because then we only postpone the risk that the Ukrainian state might financially collapse to a distant point in time, then we need to have good arguments also for the German public why we need to address this and why we need to step our support. And when it comes to, like, for example, climate change, I think what the Ukrainian government also stressed very much is that they very much want to align with the European Green Deal and want to, in this process of reconstruction, also address challenges created by climate change. And I think this is actually also the way to go to support this. This is also probably why the journalist that interviewed me picked this example up of energy efficient refurbishing of houses in Ukraine, because of course it looked a little bit like this is not the right priority. But this is part also of the priorities that the Ukrainian government has set as a contribution to aligning themselves to the European Green Deal, and thereby also by reconstructing, making a contribution to that agenda of dealing with climate change.
I would like to completely agree with you, Julian, and to broaden it a bit. So integration of climate change and construction is something that is already happening. But not only in terms of these intentions, but also in terms of academia gain. Several projects that are being planned and Kyiv School of Economics applied for funding about being climate neutral cities, for example, in implementing this idea. Research on food security, which is also a part of that. And again, someone has mentioned today, it seems to me it was Magda on the very first panel, Kakhovska Dam. The consequences of this catastrophe and climate change, well, that is obvious, that this is linked and we have to deal with it somehow. And what is a good thing that it seems to me we mean Ukrainian society, we are somehow avoiding the trap of very simple decisions. For example, we forget about cases on reconstruction that Soviet Union went through reconstruction as well after the Second World War. But there the decision was very simple, just to rebuild whatever was destroyed. That is simply, I'm not an expert in this field, but I doubt that will happen to Kakhovska Dam. But on the other hand, and here it's again what will happen to rural areas, and I'll bring up the question about expertise and master program again, and the trap of simple decisions. Now I'm interviewing my students, to tailor the program for them, for their needs, expectations, etc. And what I often hear is, why do I need to study, let's say, critical theory of urban studies if I want to build nice roads in Kyiv? So the parallel with this question about rural areas, we have to, in order to deal with this issue, we have to understand that it's not a city up on a hill. City doesn't exist without village. That's obvious. But does the field meaning my students ready to study rural planning, regional planning as a separate course to waste their time? They want nice roads. They want nice infrastructure for bicycles. for example. So that's, danger and trap of simple decisions is not avoided, but we are in the process.
Okay. You want to add something, or should we take a second round?
Maybe just few small questions again about rural reconstruction and some good examples of how culture can step into. I don't know if you all hear that I think in some late spring or summer last year, a missile attacked the Grigory Skovoroda Museum in the small village of Skovorodenici. Grigory Skovoroda is Ukrainian Baroque philosopher, and the museum is actually, and the village is located far from any military facility, any kind of facility, so it was a deliberate hit for a cultural heritage building. And now it's being repaired, and this is an important step for a local community because the small village is basically formed around the museum, and the life of many people in this rural area is formed around the museum. So it's important where we can to step into reconstruction projects of heritage sites because that will bring life to local communities. And one more example from the large-scale invasion. There is another small village in Donetsk Oblast which is called New York. There was a previous Soviet name, what I don't remember, but the original name. Sorry?
It doesn't matter.
Yes, it doesn't matter. So it's a very small village.
Isn't it in Donetsk? Or?
Yeah,
Yes, in Donetsk region. Yes. And Ukrainian writer Viktoriya Sereda, who was killed by Russians this summer, she founded a literary festival in this village. So again, that was a cultural event that brought life to the small village and to the local community. So my point is, where it's possible, culture can be a tool how to come back to life in those small areas.
Mm. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we have, I think, a chance for a quick, short second round. Please, you have some questions from the online audience?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that is a question from Lilia Bielefeld, whom I believe will also be here tomorrow on the workshop. And that is a question to Viktoriya, which is, as I quote, as someone coming from, excuse my pronunciation, Zaporizhia.
Zaporizhia, yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pronunciation is not better, but
We just talked to a friend who's immigrated from Ukraine to Israel in the 90s, and now they witness new atrocities of war. And do you have any examples of Jewish families coming back to Ukraine, or do you know of any institutions helping them to relocate?
Any other further questions, please?
Yeah, a very general question. It was honestly very depressing to hear all this, to learn all this from you. And I wonder whether there is an attempt somewhere, be it in Ukraine, be it somewhere else, to frame the necessity to rebuild the country in a positive way, in an appealing way, so that people will support it, people in the West.
It's another depressing question, actually. Yeah, please.
I also tried to be short and to conclude a bit more positively. Yes?
Thank you.
Now we experience this really big problem, big tragedy by destroying all it. But any renovation and any start is a chance to change something. And probably it has sense, maybe it's happening, I just don't know, but you know more of it. It's a very complex deal, renovation, reconstruction, and to make it attractive for the people, they want to come back. We should probably plan it as a real complex with creating new plans or innovating working places and so on, with an idea that this will be attractive for people to come there with the new possibilities to live. Is there any idea for some probably futurological reconstruction of the region? So it's very complex, of course, philosophically, economically, sociologically, and so on, formulated. But someone, it could be realistic, because we had in Donetsk, although independent of the war, a lot of depressive regions. They needed the economical reconstruction and so on. And we have some chance quartered, of course, not to
bring something new to the region, probably not just right after the war, but with perspective and so on. Is there any general view of such solutions? Thank you.
Okay, this is now time for creativity and fantasy and no, I think this is important. I mean, I think this needs to be, there's no blueprint for this anyhow, so yeah, please, maybe you start with this concrete question, which was...
with the recent issue, I could comment on the vice versa, that when, beginning from 2014, national cultural organizations and including the national cultural organizations supporting Jewish population of Jewish origin on Ukrainian territories were very much involved in helping people to escape the military zones and relocate to either Israel or Poland or many other countries. And this became a very important element of rethinking of historical past, what I was able to see in interviews, because in the Soviet time, we all know to be of other nationality, ethnicity, and especially there were some nationalities which were unwanted, or which there was a whole hierarchy of relationships based on whether you are belonging to better nationalities or nationalities such as Crimean Tatars, for example, yes, or deported German groups and so on. So in this case, the ethnic past of many families was really hidden or forgotten just for survival purposes. And what we observed that those families were trying to come up with the family stories which would help them to reconnect with those local communities where they were relocated. And of course, I do assume it's very early to say something about the research, because what is happening in Israel is just unfolding in front of our eyes. And for me, the question would be about traumatization of doing some research, both for scholars, for those who escape those situations. So maybe I think if we are talking about research, then it will take some time before we'll have more of research and we can say something more confident in these cases. And this futuristic vision, for me, one very problematic and ringing bell situation is that in many cases in those talks about the rebuilding, one big group is missing, and these are scholars. So constantly we have interlinkages, at least in discourses, and this is very visible. My colleague did a big sociological study with both experts and local communities. So they would name civil society, businesses, and governments, international governments, but somehow academia in the mental map of thinking about the rebuilding is absent quite often. And I think this is for us a big challenge, how to remap ourselves and how to help with this different types of imagining or understanding the complexities of the process.
Thanks for this really nice question about reframing and how to sell it in a way that it could be supported, the whole reconstruction. Because it's about selling, right?
Yeah, well, it's part of it.
And I was thinking that, we have to deal with emotions. But not with emotions, don't pity us, right? But that is a chance to experience the pure creation. Like you said, it's new beginning. And to overcome the eternal fear of death. So you have to contribute to something that could live for very long period of time, for decades, for generations. That's how could it be framed?
And maybe I will add a bit to what Tetiana is saying. It's very important to stay very concrete not to ask money for rebuilding Ukraine, but what Ukraine 24 initiative is doing, ask money for a very concrete block in Borodyanka. And people are more likely to give money for this building, this group of people who need to restore the building than in general to some rebuilding or reconstruction. So it's about empathy, about feelings, and about building connections between societies, between group of people, and then of course, it's not the universal recipe, but this is something that is working now.
Final word from you.
If I may add on this question on like what are positive aspects, or ending on a positive note on reconstruction. I think there are at least two assets that Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian state has for reconstruction. One is that before Russia's full-scale invasion, there was already a reform of the government levels and decentralization taking place. So giving more powers also to decentralize and the local level. And I think,
but of course, there has now been a large rollback during the war. So
yeah, that's for sure. But at least
for good reason. But
but at least I would still think that I believe in the stickiness of institutions.
Okay.
So in that sense, I would
political
say.
scientist.
So in that sense, at least, I think there is an asset for organizing this in a way, at least, that multiple levels actually have a chance also to voice to raise their voices in this. And the second asset is the strong and active civil society that Ukraine has. And this Dream platform example that I gave, this was like an initiative by Ukrainian civil societies, clearly understanding that for accountability and monitoring, this is not only important for them in the Ukrainian context, but it will also be important for international supporters of Ukraine. There's a clear understanding of this, and this was an initiative by civil society, and I think this is also why it is so important to strengthen also this civil society's voice in their discussions. And this is not always easy, because it's, of course, to a certain extent, the state government needs to be in the lead there, but we need to make sure, or at least support those that also bring in different perspectives.
Yeah, thank you very much, all of you. I think this is a topic which will certainly come back to us, and I think this will be a topic over the next years to come, no matter how the war develops, and hopefully eventually ends at a certain point with the Ukrainian victory. No matter, I think this topic will stay with us for maybe for some of us for the rest of their lives. So we could only, focusing on a few of the daunting challenges, I think with this, which is connected with this topic, I think it was a good reminder of some important aspects. I think also the demographic aspects which were mentioned, the question of return and staying, circular migration may play a great role in future as well. You mentioned the outside migration labor forces which may be needed in Ukraine, which may come from elsewhere, non-European countries maybe, or most certainly. We have not really discussed or at least touched upon what to do now with the occupied territories. It's very difficult. I mean, this is something we had left out, and we don't know how this situation will be there in future. And of course, we don't know how would a Ukrainian society look like? What would be actually the impact of the war, of the violence, of the traumas on the society? We have not yet. We have probably some ideas or some or maybe also some concerns here. On the other hand, I would like to take up your last point on this. I think there is also this enormous spirit of the self-organization of Ukrainian people and the civil society here, and I think this is utterly needed also for this question in future. We'll not work without that. So thank you very much.